now we're going to focus a little more on the impact of heat islands and environmental justice. So our moderator is an environmental justice icon, Vernice Miller-Travis. She's one of the nation's leading experts, pioneers, and most respected thought leaders on environmental justice, a deeply skilled practitioner in the multicultural engagement and organizational development with significant expertise in clean air and water, regulatory systems, and environmental and urban planning. Speaking will be Dr. Lemir E. Teron. I hope I pronounced that correctly. He's an associate professor at Howard University. In the Department of Earth, Environmental, and Equity, he holds a PhD in Energy and Environmental Policy from the University of Delaware and completed a NOAA-funded postdoc at Florida A&M, where he also taught at the College of Law. We also have Dr. Jon Gorman. He's a licensed clinical psychologist in Maryland, the owner of Towson Therapy Group, a psychotherapy practice in Towson, and an assistant clinical professor of psychology at Loyola University, Maryland. His professional focus is the psychological impacts of climate change and what to do about it. And then there's Councilman Mark Conway, a Baltimore City Councilman. He represents the 4th District. Originally from the Bronx and the son of 2 law enforcement officers, he chairs the Public Safety and Government Operations Committee and sits on the Economic and Community Development, Health, Environment, and Technology and Rules and Legislative Oversight Committee. It's a mouthful. Mark is committed to leveraging his experience from within city government and as a nonprofit executive to deliver for the residents of his district in Baltimore. So please give it up for our panels. It looks like we're setting up still, but please give it up for the panelists.
Thank you. Good morning, all. While they're doing that, that gives me a chance to chat with you. And living in Prince George's County as I do, one knows that the traffic between here and Baltimore is outrageous. So why does one leave 15 minutes later than one started to? And you know that's just going to be a problem, right? But we are privileged and thanking the Planning Committee for the Baltimore Climate Summit, the Greater Baltimore Climate Summit, for inviting us, for starting early with this conversation. And I want to applaud all of you for packing this room at 8 o'clock and 8:30 in the morning. So we are serious about this conversation, right? So I told my panelists that I was going to start with this, this observation. So I am from New York. I didn't know you were from the Bronx. Now that I know that you're from the Bronx, that explains a lot, okay? An awful lot. But my family is from here, Baltimore City, and Ellicott City, Maryland. And so I spent most of my life as a child coming here to Baltimore to spend usually Easter with my great aunt Cora, the one who should have been a nun in our family. She was not the one who was a nun, but we were serious black Catholics from here in Baltimore. And so I came every Easter to go to church with her, to spend a wonderful time with her. And her youngest son is just 3 months older than I am, though he's the last of his generation and I'm the first of mine. And so my cousin Tony and I would walk all over Baltimore. At least I thought we were walking all over Baltimore. And, but I never saw any white folks. And so it reminded me so much of Harlem, where I was from, where you never saw any white folks. Of course, there was a thriving white community in New York City, but they just didn't live where we lived. And so Baltimore to me was that same place. My whole life, and I mean my whole life, into my middle 40s. So one day, I'm coming here. I was in New York visiting. My husband and I are driving back, and a dear friend of mine, a great environmental justice leader, Damu Smith, who passed away in 2005, was at Johns Hopkins getting very advanced cancer treatment and asked me to bring him some organic fruit. So I stopped at the market in New York, bring it down. I called Johns Hopkins, and I say, what exit should I get off 95? And they tell me an exit. And I get off at that exit, my husband and I. And we get off in the exit, and I see these beautiful oak savannas, tree-lined streets on both sides. The trees are so big that they almost meet, right? Beautiful stores and shops, and white people everywhere. And I'm like, where the hell am I? I have no idea where I am. And I mean, I am literally flummoxed. But the neighborhood was beautiful. It had stores, it had shops, people were out doing their thing. It was a Saturday afternoon, but the trees really took me out. The extraordinary trees, because I don't remember seeing trees like this in East Baltimore where my aunt lived when I would come down here all the time. And I remember saying to myself, you mean there's a whole nother part of Baltimore that I've never seen? There's a part that's green and verdant and thriving, where people's needs are being met, where people can get what they need, where they can have the kinds of environmental amenities, the natural resource amenities that help people to grow and to thrive. You mean that actually exists in Baltimore, and I never knew it, and I had never seen it, and I had never been there, although I had been coming here since the 60s when I was a child. I'm talking way back, right? And the reason that I share that with you is to say that the issue that we're going to talk about on this panel is not just about tree canopy. It's not just about whether or not some communities have the natural resources that they need and some don't. What you need to understand about Baltimore City is that Baltimore City is the trendsetter for everything that we know about inequality in the United States. The first city in the United States to codify and capture residential segregation in a legal construct that could pass muster in the Supreme Court was Baltimore City, in a case called the Euclid decision. That really, and they tried for years and years and years, Baltimore City tried to make sure that people of different races did not live together. But they could never figure out legally what to do so that they wouldn't be called on it. And they finally figured it out in this case called the Euclid decision. And then after Baltimore figured out how to perfect residential segregation, every other city in the United States began to take it up because Baltimore had set the pace. Residential segregation in this city is defined by the conditions in which people live, by the resources that people have access to, and by life expectancy, right? So we know that in the 55 community districts in Baltimore City, there are several of them where the difference in life expectancy is 20 or more years. And that also follows race, and it follows the patterns of residential segregation. So you're going to hear a lot from other people. Obviously, this is what Vernice does, right? Vernice does race and geography, race and place. That's what Vernice has done for 39 years. And I wish someday we'll be able to have a conversation where that will not be the deciding factor about environment and quality of life and all of the values things that we have come to talk about. And it will not be the thing that makes some people more vulnerable to climate change and the threats and others. But I want to invite my panelists to come up, and let's get this party started. Mics, although I could bring this mic, couldn't I? And upset the whole apple cart. Good morning. So we thought we would start with 5 minutes of conversation from each of our panelists to set the frame for what they've come to share with us. Then we're going to have a bit of Q&A, and then we're going to turn it over to you to ask us some questions. So, Mark, do you want to kick us off?
No. Good morning. Can you guys hear me? My name is Mark Conway. I serve on the City Council in Baltimore City. A lot of folks may know me because I see a lot of you guys often. I do a lot of the environmental agree bills on the City Council, where I'm always the one from Baltimore City advocating for green policies in Annapolis. So good to see my friends here. Let's see. We talked a little bit about my bio and what I've been doing, but we haven't touched much on the environmental side of things that I've been working on. So a couple of bills that I've worked on in my last 5 years on the council, and probably some of my ties and why I'm relevant for this panel, are efforts around climate change, efforts around the urban heat island effect, and particularly a bill that I passed focused on cool roofs. Who knows what a cool roof is? You better know what it is. So I passed a bill on the City Council that requires that all new roofs, all flat roofs, be cool roofs going forward. And a big part of the reason I saw that as an opportunity was because I had to replace my own roof. And I learned very quickly that for many of the row homes in Baltimore City, you have to replace your roof every 10 to 15 years. I see some head shaking here because you probably had to replace your roof. And it made me begin to ask the question, how do we use that as an opportunity for folks to upgrade to a roofing technology that makes it cooler for their home, helps them save energy, helps cool their neighborhoods, and this is where the idea came in. So the cool roofs legislation is very simple. All it does is require that all new roofs or a replacement of 50% or more of your roof require that roof to be at least reflective. So you could use a white roof, and that is sufficient. And there's a whole list of materials that meet the grade. You can add stormwater implications. You can make it a green roof, or you can add solar, and you can just be a superstar. But what it did, and my hope is the outcome of the bill will change over the course of the next decade the look of Baltimore City from the sky. And you should see many more white roofs that then can reduce our urban heat island impact. Vernice was talking a little bit about the impact of redlining and the difference in neighborhoods. Before I came onto the city council, I ran an organization called the Baltimore Tree Trust. And the Baltimore Tree Trust was founded to serve underserved neighborhoods to plant trees, and I added the additional goal of training folks for jobs in tree care and landscaping, adding that economic consideration as well. But what I found in that work was there were huge swaths of communities that just didn't have any trees. At the time while I was working there, we were working in East Baltimore, and we worked all through East Baltimore planting trees in pretty much every available opportunity. But there was a study going on at the time that looked at the difference in heat between neighborhoods. And we were working in East Baltimore in the Madison East End neighborhood. And it looked at, during the peak of summer, the difference in heat in that neighborhood compared to a cooler neighborhood or a richer neighborhood or a whiter neighborhood, that being Roland Park. And the difference was somewhere between 10 and 14 degrees in the peak of summer. So when it's 85 degrees in Roland Park, it's 100 degrees in Madison East End. And the problem here is multifold, not only because it's hotter in those neighborhoods, but also the residents of those neighborhoods have less of the means to pay for AC. And as Ava said earlier, we have cooling stations, resiliency centers around the city, but then those people have to get to those resiliency centers. So you have this growing divide in people's ability to adapt to the changes in climate. So this is one of the things that we're going to have to continue to think about, the impact of heat, and how that really changes the experience between folks depending on what neighborhood you live in. So cool roofs, an easy win. You have to replace your roof every 10 to 15 years anyway. It doesn't cost you any extra to go from a black roof, which you often see today, to a white roof. It's a no-brainer for many folks, but now it's law, so you better do it. But even more, when you look at the opportunity to plant trees, greening these neighborhoods creates shade, and it provides an opportunity for folks to come outside, because if it's too hot outside, you're not coming outside. That means you got to stay inside, which means you got to keep your inside cool, or find some cooling station around the city. So really looking forward to getting into the conversation, just a little bit of what I've been doing on this issue, and there's probably so much more, but I'll hand off to
Thank you. Lemir?
1, 2. All right. Good morning, folks. Lemir Teron is introduced. You got my name like 99% right. My mom is happy. I am on faculty at Howard University in the newly created Department of Earth, Environment, and Equity. We're 1 year old, so it's the most important time. Yeah. I think it's the most important time to be doing this type of work at the most important place on the planet to be doing that type of research. And I'm not saying that just because that's where I get my check signed. I didn't get the memo from these two fellas. I haven't worn a top. I think I won one time like the last 15 years, and y'all set me up. But in any event,
you look good, man.
yeah.
Don't worry.
Y'all don't want to hear about my anxiety. You want to hear about why I was asked to talk. I do a lot of work at the nexus of urban forestry and urban heat. And my induction into the situation, I used to work at a school in upstate New York called SUNY ESF, College of Environmental Science and Forestry. You all familiar? Yeah. Yeah. So big SUNY system, you're not going, I was telling my good colleague up front, you're not going there to get an English degree, literature, math, only environmental degrees. I worked there for 7 years. Environmental justice, I'll get into that in a second. Worked there for 7 years at a forestry school. So I was running an urban tree campaign, a research-based campaign, and I would go all around the city trying to get the number of trees, and not just trees. I like to talk about vegetation. I don't think we talk about vegetation enough. But in any event, I was running this campaign trying to get folks excited about plantings and have conversations about workforce development and how can we get people paid and trained in public science, blah, blah, blah. In any event, I'd go to all these community meetings, neighborhood association meetings, and they'd always have a cop either right before me or right after me on the agenda. And inevitably, every single place that I saw tree deficits, every single place where we saw urban heat metastasizing, these would be the same places that had heightened levels of gun violence and shots fired and assaults, etc. And then their funky income relationships, and we don't need to get into that. But that was just like this is not just an ecology issue, this is a public health issue. And then I started working with the real doctors, the MDs. Like if somebody falls out in here, I can't help you. So I started working with the real MDs, and we started asking interesting questions about, what's the linkage between urban heat and extreme heat and suicides and homicides? And a lot of smart folks are making those nexus globally. We're thinking about altitude, many different things. And then we also think about maternal health, and if we got any pediatricians or OBGYNs in the room, we know that black women in this country are at heightened exploitation exposure to extreme heat, unlike any other population. So that's my induction into the conversation, and I will pass it off to my man on the left.
Jon?
Hi, good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. So I'm a clinical psychologist. That should actually say Loyola University. But I have a private practice in Towson as well. So really honored to be a part of this panel and looking forward to our conversation today. I talked to a lot of audiences about the mental health impacts of climate change. One thing that I'm working on is starting with what there is to hope for. My spouse will be the first to tell you that when I get going about the climate crisis, I can bring down the whole mood at a dinner party in about 2 minutes flat. So part of the reason why we have heat islands is that there's a paucity of tree cover and green space in urban areas. So not only does this amplify the heat island effect, but it also denies community members access to one of the best medicines that we have, nature. So the research on this is incontrovertible. It's established fact that close proximity to green space improves health and mental health. Access to green space reduces stress and depression, reduces symptoms of ADHD, reduces violence. Those with access to nearby green space report a greater sense of calm, increased well-being, feeling less selfish. Spending time in nature increases generosity, increases cooperation, increases kindness. People actually heal faster from surgery if their hospital room has a view of green space compared to those whose windows look upon buildings. So we can't talk about the detriments of urban heat islands without also acknowledging that all these benefits and more are right at our fingertips if we can prioritize expanding green space. So now on to what do we know about heat. 2024 is the hottest year in recorded history, and it will be the coolest year across the rest of our lifetimes. Heat changes our psychology. When it's hot, we can't think as clearly. We feel more irritable, more aggressive. A study at Harvard showed that people living in dorms without air conditioning actually performed worse on their exams than the students living in dorms with air conditioning. We have data in Baltimore from a Johns Hopkins study that as the temperature rises, their emergency department sees an increase in admissions due to violence. As the temperature rises, homicide rate goes up, car thefts increase, drivers honk their horns more frequently when it's hotter out, and they even did a study in Major League Baseball that batters are hit more frequently by pitches with each degree in temperature rise. There are over 15 studies showing the increase in the suicide risk as the temperature goes up. So there's a few mechanisms at play here. First, heat seems to have an independent effect on our psychology. So in 2018, a study on a sample size of over 2 million people across 10 years showed that as temperature rises, more people rate their mental health as not good. Note, this doesn't mean that everyone all of a sudden qualifies for a mental disorder like major depressive disorder. It's just that everyone is walking around more irritable, a shorter fuse, a little closer to their breaking point. So a second mechanism is that heat makes it harder for us to take care of ourselves in our normal ways, which compounds the negative psychological effects. So people don't sleep as well when it's hot out, and when people are not sleeping well, that affects everything in terms of our ability to cope. Even though there are more warm days in a given year, on net, people exercise less when it's hotter out, and we know that exercise or physical activity is an important way to deal with stress for so many people. 1 in 6 people take a prescription psychotropic medication. Psychiatric medications impact thermoregulation, or the way that our bodies regulate heat. As a result, people with mental illness are more vulnerable in extreme heat. So finally, many populations are especially vulnerable to the psychological effects of heat. So in addition to those with pre-existing psychiatric diagnoses, elderly, outdoor workers, women, especially pregnant women, low-income individuals, and children. Many Maryland school districts close when the temperatures inside the classrooms reach 85 degrees or higher. And this has a cascade of effects. Sometimes lunch at school is the child's most reliable meal. When kids stay home, their caregivers may need to take off work, or the kids go without supervision for the day. And unfortunately, we're seeing more and more and more days when this happens. So 1 year ago, psychologists published a study of climate-related concerns of 16,000 youth across the United States, ages 16 to 25, in all 50 states. The results: young people see what's happening. They're scared. They feel helpless. 75% say their future feels frightening. They fear for their health. They feel that their government has not done enough about climate change. 40% of youth are so distressed that it's negatively impacting their daily functioning, things like getting out of bed, going to school, socializing, just being a kid. So what's more, for young people, these concerns hold true regardless of political party. So we can do better. There are actions that we can take to help people better adapt to a warming planet, and delaying is not an option. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, each of you, for setting the context and bringing some of yourselves and your work into this conversation. I'm going to slip in a question, which is not a question that we talked about in the prep, which is, how much of this is by design, this inequality, this geospatial distribution of benefits and burdens, this who has an environment that you can thrive in and who does not? How much of this is by design, and how much of this is just a quirk of how cities and demographics change over time? What do you think?
Is this working? No, it's not working. That working? Oh yeah, much better. Did you guys actually hear me last time, or was I making that up? All right. So I think a couple of things here, and I sort of see this being in the policy world. These are a matter of systems, and what I mean by that is certain people know how to work the systems. People know what they want their neighborhoods to look like. Not everybody knows how to make systems that allow them to do that. People know how to protect their neighborhoods, but not everybody knows how to navigate the systems in order to do that. And so when we're looking at the impacts of climate change, when we're looking at maintenance of open space and green space and trees and yards and parks and things that everybody wants. Everybody wants a park near their house. Not everybody gets that. Everybody wants a tree-lined street. Not everybody gets that. But what you find is some people know how to navigate the system in order to advocate more effectively for their communities. And so to those victors go the spoils. And I think sometimes our systems don't support or favor the people that don't know how to speak up for themselves well enough. And I think this is where the equity conversation is incredibly important. This is where it's important that we go out and seek insight from folks that are not at the table and make sure they find their place at that table. But yeah, I think that's at least from my perspective, what I see today.
Lemir, am I pronouncing your name
Yes,
properly?
thank you. Mom is happy again. So I won't speak specifically how much urban heat islands are by design, but certainly we know the siting of interstates in majority black neighborhoods in the 50s and 60s, which was preceded by redlining a couple decades earlier. That certainly was intentional. The whole premise of environmental racism is we're going to target you because of who you are, demographic X, Y, Z, and we know that black folks have been on the front lines of environmental inequality in this country way before there was a phrase environmental inequality, justice, racism. So that's irrefutable. You want to have that argument? I teach a class 2 p.m. today. Come on down to D.C. with me. Applied environmental justice. Yeah. I believe in public science and democratizing, and I mean that. I'm going to invite you. I teach a science and public policy class next semester, so you'll definitely be on the docket. But the end of self-aggrandizement, I think a complement to your question is not just how much of this is by design. What's our complicity? So we're in Baltimore, Maryland, a city that's done a number on young black people, young black men not just young black men, but specifically young black men in terms of the violence for decades. How much of this conference's agenda is talking about workforce development for these guys, ecological education for these guys? So certainly we can historicize this conversation and say, yeah, they set us up in the 60s with the interstates and cities X, Y, and Z. But if we're serious about the transition, let's look at all these sponsors right here. What is the agenda for young people, young black men, young black women, young Latino in Baltimore, so that we're not just saying, hey, climate change is coming, just July 21st, hottest day in human history, 2024. Guess what? One day later, it was even hotter. Let's move beyond that conversation and let's have a real conversation about transition. And just to complement what I mean by that, so about 3 weeks ago, as I told you, I teach an applied class. I took my class to a microgrid facility in Montgomery County, Maryland. Anybody familiar with the Ride-On microgrid facility? Of course. And the irony, I went to high school in Montgomery way back in the day, so the same buses that I was creating terror with my friends on in the 1980s and 90s, I'm now taking my class to see, their 60-plus electric bus vehicle fleet. But anyway, very nice facility, big battery and solar installation, and I asked the operators of the facility, where'd you all get this battery from? And I won't mention the country, but thousands and thousands and thousands of miles away. We have an environmental consortium right here in Maryland, universities, research centers, hiring institutions, energy consortiums. Why are we not designing and developing those technologies right here, in addition to planting trees? Because we're quick to say, hey, let's plant trees and flowers. Why are we actually making this a workforce development issue and actually giving the people who aren't in this room right now a meaningful part of this conversation, as opposed to just getting talked about for the next 6 hours today?
Say that. Jon?
Yeah, just to respond to your question, Vernice, about is this by design? Well, I don't think there's a group of people going in and saying, like, okay, let's make this area of the city hotter than this. However, we have public historical records of redlining maps, not just in Baltimore, but in cities across the United States. And what researchers have done is taken those redlining maps of various cities and then overlay on top of those redlining maps current day temperature differential. And there is a strong correlation. So the difference in temperature that Councilman Conway was talking about earlier, we see that. And if you look at the redlining maps of Baltimore, East and West Baltimore versus Roland Park, there are almost outlines that correlate those maps with current day heat temperature differences. So that's a really important factor as well.
So let's segue into, so I think we have laid the predicate for how bad the problem is, how long the problem has been bad, how the problem got to be bad, and it's having psychological impacts on the populations of folks who are most affected. But then there's the part about what can we do, right? What can communities do? So I want to ask you to help identify and explain a variety of community building efforts and advocacy and adaptation strategies that are being implemented across Maryland and the rest of the nation. How can community adaptation and advocacy practices be best included into lawmaking? How does currently available data lead to possibly new discussions or strategies? Jon, let's start with you.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, this is a great question. We know that this is a problem, but what do we do about it? I think there are. I think there's three things. Here are the top three things that I recommend in terms of legislation or policy. So the first is, how do we legislate, or how do we make policies around increasing green spaces? Not just because of the reductions on the effects of heat, but also, as I mentioned, all of the psychological health and community health benefits that comes from access to green space. Not just increasing green space, but actually making sure that people can access those green spaces in terms of public transportation and just their proximity to it. So the second thing is, and this is why I'm really happy to be a part of this panel, mental health is not often a part of this conversation, but we know that mental health is so impacted by heat. So in terms of something that we can legislate, let's get more information about this. Let's make mental health a part of this conversation. If we were to run a needs assessment right now in the most vulnerable communities in Baltimore and other cities, is this something that the mental health needs as the environmental crisis worsens, that we're able to meet the need? Are there enough people that can help? And do people have access to community resilience hubs? The third thing I'd recommend is requiring the involvement of community members in planning for and coming up with solutions. Yes. And we see this in, if for bills that establish a work group, requiring that members of the work group are members of the community. And there are great examples of this here and also in other places where community members are prioritized as the leaders of projects for determining what they need and how they want to make a difference. So those are my three recommendations. Thank you.
The remedial answer is we dig down on public science. I teach residents where to plant trees, and if you plant strategically, then it will lead to this level of economic gain. Maybe your energy bill will drop precipitously, or your house will be a little bit cooler, et cetera. But I think the non-remedial answer is we have to stand our ground and fight. Maryland is a frontline state in this time of this unholy national lobotomy, and we have to ask the question, are we, it's not a joke, folks, it's a lobotomy going on, and you gotta say, are you complicit in that lobotomy? So are we gonna fight? It's just that simple. We can bring in the environmental science. I'm happy to wear the engineering hat if you wanna do that. I wanna talk, are we ready to fight? I was on a call last week, and folks, part of a grant that I'm a part of, I won't mention the grant out anybody, but maybe we need to change the grant's name and remove justice out the title because it will be looked at more favorably by the powers that be. I'm like, man, if we're not really willing to stand our ground on something so simple, we might as well pack it in right now. Well, if you may make yourself a target if you don't change your name. That was the response. I said, hey, you can do all the right things. We see that all the time. People do all the right things and still get mowed down. So if you're not willing to paraphrase Malcolm, Brother Malcolm, if you're not willing to stand your ground, don't use the word justice in your vocabulary, right? Or let's just have a conference setting. But if we're serious about environmental justice and advancing environmental justice, then we're going to have to stand our ground on a statewide level, as I said, in this national time of crisis.
So a couple of things came to mind when you asked the question, how do we get this done? And the first that came to mind was, I'm a big reader, and one of the big things that I read was LBJ's biography. Fascinating. I encourage everyone to read it. It's like 6 books. And they're huge, but they're amazing. Anyway, there's a story where they talk about the Civil Rights Act and how Martin Luther King came in and was advocating to LBJ on the Civil Rights Act. And essentially, I see you shaking your head, one of the things LBJ said to him is, go out there and make me do it. You have to do the work. It starts with you. It starts with you going out there and advocating. Second thing here, of course, vote. obviously, duh. 3, you have to know how to count, because your vote is not enough. Your vote does not actually necessarily change what happens in Congress. It's going to be those swing districts that are ultimately going to be the balance. And we're looking at our government right now change dramatically in a way such that all these efforts that we've been putting together for the last few decades are being stripped apart. All the progress that we've made is being stripped apart, and not because you didn't vote here, but because folks maybe didn't vote in other places. And so whatever you can do to make sure that we can help flip those seats and make the difference there is going to make all the difference. And then I think the other piece, I'm going to say, lift up by your bootstraps, look down and see where you can take change and make change in your own life. But it's got to be systems. Changing individual instances of what you do is not sufficient. You have to change systems and look at ways for systems change in order to have a dramatic impact. If you're not changing systems, you're going to be thinking about it all the time. You're going to be thinking about whether or not you're going to compost or not. You just need to be a composter. You just need to be someone who recycles. You need to be someone that bikes to work or whatever it may be. And you need to make sure that you're advocating for systems that help do the same thing. So those are a couple things that came to mind.
So we have 5 minutes left. Y'all were supposed to have 20 minutes for Q&A. 2 minutes left. Thank you very much. But I do want to give people an opportunity, if you have a burning question, to please ask it. This is really a tremendous, tremendous panel of folks who are working on these issues in a variety of different ways, and I couldn't agree with all of them more. You have to take leadership, right? You have to make change, and you have to show up in all the places that they don't expect you to show up to. The planning boards. How many people have ever been to a planning board meeting? Ever. Land use and zoning. Get to that table, sit at that table, and don't get up until they drag you out the room, because that's where the decisions are being made. Any questions? Okay. Say your name. Hi.
So how are we justifying air conditioning not being considered essential when our professors here have listed all of the health effects of, being hot?
What a great question. And we have a member of the Baltimore City Council who might know something about that.
I don't have a direct answer for that today, but that's a good idea, and I'm going to look into it to figure out what we can do to ensure that people have AC. But
Make
that's
sure
it.
that you find him, give him your contact.
You don't have to find me, but please do find me.
Any other questions? Question here. Where's the mic? Question here. Okay, come on.
My name is Jason. I've lived in Baltimore pretty much my entire life in many different neighborhoods. And with her about rent and escrow, I think that one of the problems with creating community that I've seen is there's so many renters, especially in the really poor neighborhoods, that are just moving from house to house. So in the Mount Clair community where I lived for 10 years, whatever, what I saw is we would try to get things started and we get people, like we had tree plantings, but then the people who planted moved for whatever reason, and we had...
No maintenance.
Sorry? What?
No maintenance.
Yeah, there's no maintenance. And so, I know the answer that I think, but I want to hear what you guys think. Do you think empowering people to own houses instead of having these investors come in and whitewash a neighborhood and move a couple people in and get that money from them, and then as soon as something happens and they can't pay rent, they're just out? One of my biggest frustrations has been that it doesn't feel like there's community building. I don't know if that was a question.
Yeah, we got you. Lemir, do you have some thoughts?
Yeah, just think about just think about the human impact of the third grader that's constantly moving, every 7 or 9 months, or the abuela that's forced to move. It's a certain indignity. Everybody hates moving, but when it's a constant cycle, in addition to the very graphic situation you laid out, the human touches, that stability can't be good for anybody. So thank you for that. I think our time is up, but
The time is up, but I want to say, Kari, I have loved this panel. We did not have enough time. This should have been a 90-minute panel because we just are scratching the surface here. But I want to say they lifted up so many amazing things that we can do, that we have the power to do. But that last question is really the essence of it all. Community building and power building is about what we do in the places where we live. We don't need people from the outside to tell us what to do. God bless Johns Hopkins, but we know what we need to do, right? We know what we need to do. And we need to build our communities from the inside out and protect and defend each other at every turn, at every turn. Here we're talking about heat islands, but heat islands is the foundation of so many of the other things that are adversely affecting us. If we want to thrive, if we want to extend our life expectancy, if we want to not spend as much time at Johns Hopkins and University of Maryland Hospital emergency rooms as we do, we have to make profound change in our community, and that starts with loving and respecting each other and each other's right to thrive. So I'm going to leave it right there. Thank you so much.